So SA Express put up a good fight, but ultimately the airline's fate was sealed today in court. Very sad news for the airline staff in particular. Let's take a broader look at our local aviation industry now with aviation specialist Linden Birns. Linden, thank you so much for joining us. We've heard that SA Express was a victim of state capture and corruption. Of course, we know what COVID and the pandemic lockdowns did to the aviation industry globally. So there were some very real challenges for this airline. But do you think it was still worth saving?
I'm sorry, I'm struggling to hear you, Sally, but I think what you're asking me is, were they worth saving? I think
Yes.
It's always sad when an airline closes its doors, and especially sad because people losing their jobs, and people who are losing their jobs through no fault of their own necessarily, and so that's always a sad point. But I think really the question ought to be, was it worth starting in the first place, and should it have been nationalized when it was? SA Express was started in the early 90s as a commercial venture between Tebi Investments and some private sector investors. It ran into trouble fairly soon after it started operating, and the initial management team and the original backers decided they wanted to get out of the business because it wasn't able to turn a profit for them. And so it was nationalized. It was taken over by Transnet. And then it was established as an SOE when Transnet unbundled, and it was established as an SOE under the SA Express Act. And that was always a curious thing. Why was it never put into SAA at the time? And these questions always dogged SA Express. And then, of course, we had all sorts of governance problems. We had issues with auditing irregularities. We had issues with the books not being properly accounted for. Then we had state capture, and we've had the findings coming out of the Zondo Commission. And to date, no one's been held accountable. And unfortunately, the former CEO, who could have answered a lot of questions, he passed away during COVID. And frankly, I think, SA Express stopped operating 2.5 years ago. There is no SA Express other than a name on a registered trade name at the moment. There are no aircraft, there are no people, there are no accountable executives or accountable officers, so its licenses are all suspended. And now, of course, it's been liquidated. So I think, in terms of consequence on the industry, very little. It's more a matter of record now that it no longer exists.
So, Linden, I hope you can hear me a little bit better now. Our team has been working to fix the audio. Great, that's wonderful. The reason I'm asking whether it's worth saving is because, one would imagine that there's a need in the local market after the grounding of other domestic airlines, PSA, Mango. And this is something that Zazi Sibanyoni Mugambi alluded to. She's from the SA Cabin Crew Association. I want you to have a listen to the clip and then respond to what she's saying.
It is devastating for so many. I mean, SAA has lost a whole lot of employees. Mango has gone, and we're trying to salvage that. Express is gone. So the aviation industry is not doing well at all. And the government, that is in charge of SOEs has also not played their part in terms of trying to protect these particular employees or try to get them some sort of cash value so that they can, at least part ways amicably. So aviation is not only bad for workers, it is bad for the daily traveler, because try book a ticket in these days to Durban. It is ridiculous. The market is raising prices because there's no competition. And the airlines are simply taking all these routes, and they're just becoming bigger, and they're capitalizing on the market. So it's not a good time, and it's about time that we get a comment from the DPE and their position on SA Express. They failed to oppose at any point.
So she's raised two important points, and I'd love you to comment on both of them. Whether the Department of Public Enterprise really left SA Express out to dry and dropped the ball with them, but also whether there's the competition in the market, because we have less flights now, I think. I'm not sure if we filled the gaps left by all these airlines closing, that there's now there's not enough competition.
Okay, so let's deal with that issue first. There are still airlines in the market. We have 4 domestic airlines: Semair, FlySafair, Airlink, and Lift. Lift is the newcomer, started during COVID. We've got South African Airways. Sorry, we've got 5 because we also have South African Airways. South African Airways only has 20% of its previous fleet. It only has 20% of its previous headcount, and it's probably only operating about 10% of the routes and schedule that it used to fly. And one of the biggest challenges that all the airlines are dealing with in the country is the loss of capacity that SAA has created by downscaling. Not so much in the domestic sector, but definitely in terms of long-haul traffic. If you think about the number of destinations SAA used to fly to in Europe, in the Americas, in Asia, Australia, and South America, none of those markets are being served by a South African carrier at the moment. And that means that the domestic airlines are getting less feeder traffic than they were getting before. The foreign airlines that come here are not flying the same size aircraft they used to operate here, and they're not flying as often as they used to operate here. Okay, in terms of, is the industry working? Yes, it is. We are seeing quite a strong recovery in the industry. We are lagging in Southern Africa behind the rest of Africa. In West Africa, they have already achieved positive growth. Their traffic is 8% higher than it was in 2019. In East Africa and North Africa, they're 6% below 2019 levels. We are 35% below, largely because of that deficit of international traffic and the exit of South African Airways from those markets. Now, the other things your guest spoke about the high fares. What she's not mentioned is the fact that we pay a huge premium for jet fuel in South Africa. We no longer refine it here. It has to be imported. We saw what happened with the floods and the devastation, the damage that caused to the rail between Durban and the Reef. We are paying, or airlines here are paying over 200% more for jet fuel at the moment than they were this time last year.
All right, okay. So it's not... so her allegations...
It's an unfair thing, and I think she needs to take that into account. And that's also a global problem. The industry is going to incur an additional $133 billion in fuel bill this year.
Wow.
Just because of the increase in fuel prices, because of what's happened with the Russia.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Sorry to jump in. But the other thing she said is that she felt that the Department of Public Enterprises basically left them out to dry. And that's in the context of what they're trying to do for SAA. And also we're hearing stories that there might be a buyer for Mango.
Yeah, and I think that is a fair criticism. I think DPE has been relatively silent and really muted on SAA. I beg your pardon, on SA Express. And it's also somewhat concerning that they've been similarly muted on Mango. Even though Mango is an SAA subsidiary, it's not covered by the SAA rescue, and it wasn't covered by the appropriation bill. And what happened then was that you had DPE taking some of the money from the appropriation bill and diverting it into the SAA subsidiaries. And now, of course, SAA is short of cash. And we saw just a few days ago, Treasury saying, oh, some of the SOEs like Denel and SAA have come with their begging bowl again. But conspicuous by their very loud silence is DPE on the whole thing. And similarly, we've had it's now been nearly 18 months since they announced the strategic equity partnership deal with Takatso Consortium, and that's gone nowhere.
Yeah, well, this is it. Lots of questions. I've got to ask you one quick question, because you mentioned quite a startling thing, that South Africa, or was it Southern Africa, is over 30% behind recovery compared to other parts of Africa. And you've explained that part of the problem is that we're just not getting enough international flights in, and therefore the local market and the markets generally, aviation is just not growing as it should be. So is there a quick solution to this? Is the right planning in place to fix this?
So I think there are two things. First of all, we need to make sure that South Africa becomes an attractive destination again. And this speaks to things like addressing crime and the perceptions that South Africa is an unsafe destination. We need to be fixing that. We need to be making sure that our airports are functioning properly. You go through our Tambo, the travelators don't work, the lights are all dim, things smell, it's not clean, and yet we're paying, as individual travelers, you're paying an airport charge for a service that, frankly, you're not getting. All these things, and people look at it and they go, actually, and then you've got load shedding if you get here and all sorts of other things. You go, is it worth the hassle? Is it worth going all that distance? Should I not maybe go somewhere that's easier to get to? It's not going to be a bother. So that's one side of the equation. SAA, yes, it would be great if we knew what was happening from public enterprises. But critically, what we really need government to do is pay attention to the regulatory environment. They're giving away the market to other African carriers. They're allowed to basically come in and do what they like in terms of cross-border flights and picking up people. I mean, I flew today from Kigali to Cape Town, but we stopped in Harare to pick up passengers who were coming to Cape Town. That's not allowed. No South African carriers are allowed to do that in reciprocation, but we allow foreign airlines to do that. So that's not helping to grow our aviation industry. That's not helping to create and sustain South African jobs.
Really important points you're making. Thank you so much for your insight. Much appreciated. Aviation specialist Linden Birns. And as he mentioned, load shedding, yep.